Welcome, friends, to another Wolff Responds. I want to call this one the National Debt Disaster. Now, I'm fully aware that the Republican Party, particularly when it's out of power, likes to moan and groan about the national debt and blame it on the Democrats. And the Democrats, in their enthusiasm to get out from under that criticism, often like to say that the national debt doesn't matter. Well, as happens so often, the Republicans are wrong and the Democrats are wrong too. That's, after all, their function to make sure we don't focus on what matters and keep ourselves glued to what doesn't. But I'm not going to play, and I'm going to talk to you about the national debt of the United States, why it is important, and why it is in perilous shape, to be as gentle about it as I can. First, the basic numbers. The national debt is the accumulation of all of the outstanding borrowing that the United States federal government in Washington has done, minus whatever portion of it has paid back. So it's the net outstanding debt of the United States. 20 years ago, in the year 2006, the national debt of the United States was about $5 trillion. Now, right away, one has to explain, and this is very simple, that the government owes debts not only to the public, but also to itself, and it counts that money. What do I mean it owes it to itself? Well, here's one of the most important examples. Every year that the Social Security Administration has existed, and it's nearly a century now, every year during which the Social Security Administration takes in more money, the money withheld from our paychecks. Often the Social Security takes in more money than it pays out to old people, people with disabilities, and so on. What does it do with the difference between the money it takes in and what it pays out to beneficiaries? The answer: it lends it to the federal government's regular budget. And as that accumulated, and it has over the years, it's an enormous amount of the government debt is really the government debt to itself. So I'm not going to count that. I am here only counting the part of the debt that the government borrows from insurance companies, banks, big corporations, wealthy individuals, and foreigners, foreign countries, foreign businesses. I exclude the average person because the average person does not lend money to the United States government, and the few who buy savings bonds, that amount of money is not significant in the larger picture of the government's debt. So I'm talking only about the debt the government has to the general public, not the debt it has to itself. Try to keep that separate, especially when you read in the mainstream press where the care is not taken to explain what I just explained. In 2006, then, the debt of the United States to the public was around $5 trillion. Today, the debt of the United States to the public is about $30 trillion. All right? It's gone up 6 times. 6 times. How did prices in America go up? Just to give you an idea, prices in America for consumer goods, that you and I buy, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, put it all together, average it out, prices today are about 50% higher than they were in 2006. So over the last 20 years, as prices went up a total of 50%, the national debt went up 600%, 6 times. In other words, the national debt is spinning out of control in the way virtually nothing else in our economy is. That alone should draw attention. What is going on with something out of whack like that? And what difference does it make? So let's begin by analyzing, because this is not done properly in the mainstream media. Let's analyze why this is happening. The government borrows money when it doesn't raise taxes enough to pay for what it spends money on. Let me give you one of the major examples. War. The United States is forever at war. That's why Mr. Trump promised to stop the endless wars, his phrase, not mine, when he was running for office. But yet, like the predecessors before him, he can't resist starting wars. He started a new one against Iran. He is making moves now that indicate he may go to war with Venezuela. He has threatened Mexico to invade that country, Nigeria to invade that country, Panama to invade that country, and Canada to make it the 51st state. Oh, yeah, Denmark in the event that they don't give up on Greenland when he wants it. So, war with Mr. Trump, like all his predecessors, is a major activity of the United States, and war, like the one in Ukraine, has already cost the United States somewhere between 50 and 150 billion. It will take years before we know the full cost. Why do I bring up the wars? Because wars present you with the following problem. You have to pay for them, and they're very expensive. Those missiles shot at the Russians in Ukraine are very expensive. Shipping them over there is very expensive. Paying for the Americans who have to manage the logistics of shooting them is expensive. Now, you could pay for this by raising taxes. That's right, the president could go on TV and he could say, my fellow Americans, we're having a big war over there in Ukraine, and it's very expensive, so I'm having to tax you all $3,400 per family to put together the money to fight the war. A president who dared to do that would very quickly face two problems. Resistance on the part of the people who would want that war to end right away because they don't want to pay for it. And would have trouble getting reelected because of the whole business. So what do presidents do? They don't ask for taxes. They don't raise the taxes. And they solve the problem of paying for war by borrowing the money, going into debt. That's a major reason why our debts are going up. But there's an even bigger one. Corporations and the rich in our society are the major donors of most political campaigns, parties, candidates, and elected politicians. Occasionally, you'll have a daring politician not depend on rich donors. Bernie Sanders was one. Zoran Mamdani in New York a couple of weeks ago was another. But they are big exceptions. Most politicians, the overwhelming majority, depend on huge donations to get elected. How do they get them? By being friendly to corporations and the rich. Those are the people who give big donations. And the one thing they all want is not to pay taxes. Oh, they'll pay a little, they understand. But they want politicians who don't raise taxes on them, who don't do it, who don't threaten to do it, who just protect and serve their donors. And here's what it means. As people, including those donors, want the government to do more and more, costing the government more and more, whether it's maintaining 700 military bases around the world, which the government does, whether providing unemployment compensation for people who lose their jobs and who, if you didn't give them that money, might be a lot more difficult to control politically than if you do. If you want the government to do all the things that corporations and the rich and the rest of us want the government to do, well, then the question goes, how is it going to be paid for? But the answer to that question with the politicians we have, Republicans, Democrats, dependent on donors, to ask the question is almost automatically to answer it. They're not going to go and get that money by taxing corporations and the rich. What they're going to do instead is borrow the money. It's the safer, easier way for politicians in the Republican and Democratic parties to do what they do. And so they have. They borrow money. And from whom? From anyone they can get it from. And that includes foreign governments. The largest foreign government that has lent money to the United States is Japan, number one. The number two country, the People's Republic of China. That's right. The United States, which is the world's largest debtor country, has as its number two creditor, number two in lending to it, its so-called enemy, the People's Republic of China. It's about $750 billion that we owe the People's Republic of China. And as I've told you, that means we pay, you, me, in the taxes we give Washington. Washington takes that money and immediately turns it over to the People's Republic of China as interest owed by the United States to the People's Republic of China for the $750 billion in debt the U.S. has to China. It's something to think about when you're asked about the relative power and strength of these two global powers. But I'm not done. Most of the money that the government borrows, it borrows from American corporations and American rich people. And you might think of this money, indeed, I would urge you to think of this money in the following way. It's precisely the decision of the government not to tax corporations and the rich that leaves them with that money that they don't have to pay in taxes, which they can instead turn around and lend to the same government when it borrows. And you know, if you're a corporation or a rich person, it's really easy to decide which to do: be taxed, kiss the money goodbye, or lend it to the government, which has to not only pay it all back to you, but pay you interest between the moment you lend it and the moment when they pay it back. So, wow, all I can tell you is this is a no brainer deal for corporations and the rich, and you should feel very upset that you are excluded from this game. Now let's take it one more step. When the discussion comes up to this point, you'll find quite a few people accepting the idea that the national debt situation is a disaster. We now owe so much money that the annual interest paid by the United States government to all its creditors is about the same as the total defense budget of the United States. If we keep going as we are, the interest will get bigger and bigger. We're currently running deficits each year of about $2 trillion. That's a difference between what is raised in taxes and what is spent. And so that's what has to be borrowed, and that adds to the national debt. So it's going up fast. Pretty soon, the government will have to be doing what some people think it's already doing, which is cutting back on other expenses to free up the money to pay back the old debts and the interest on the old debts. There are many who suspect that the so-called efficiency game, with Elon Musk firing large numbers of people, followed by the government shutdown, which are two events that have one thing in common. They cut back on expenditures by the federal government. It doesn't have to pay the people it fires. It doesn't have to spend when it's shut down. This is money saved from serving us and is therefore available to keep down the borrowing. And why is that necessary, to keep down the borrowing? Because the creditors, corporations and the rich, domestic and foreign, have let the United States government know they're no longer willing to keep lending to the United States. How do we know that? There are three companies in the world who measure and keep track of the creditworthiness of every country and of every company engaged in international business. These are called credit rating agencies. One of them is the Standard and Poor Company, another one is Moody's, and the third one has the name Fitch. All three are American companies, and all three keep track of the creditworthiness of the United States. Until recently, the United States received the best possible creditworthiness, AAA. But in recent time, all three of these companies, each independent from the other, have reduced the credit rating of the United States from AAA to AA. Are there other countries who have AAA? Yes. They're better credit risks than we are. And if something doesn't happen soon, they'll bring the credit rating down another notch. The world is telling the United States, you're borrowing too much. Up until now, we've been willing to lend, but we are not willing the way we were. You better do something. Mr. Trump is trying to look to those creditors as though he were doing something. That was the government efficiency theater we had in the first few months of his administration, and that was the shutdown we had in recent weeks. There will no doubt be other efforts he makes. The tariffs are raising money. That's another new thing he's done. But none of it is raising enough money. Meanwhile, the war in Venezuela that he's gearing up to is costing a fortune. And Mr. Trump's declining popularity has led him, for example, to propose giving a tariff dividend to citizens, $2,000 a family, or something like that. That will cost a lot of money, and that's going to make the creditors very unhappy. He's caught, Mr. Trump, between the demands of a declining economy, because that's what it is, of a declining empire, because that's what we are, and the bitter rage of the creditors. That's what's going on with the national debt. Of course, it matters. What the creditors say, we won't continue to lend, it's panic in Washington. They wouldn't know what to do. But let me conclude by offering them a way out. You ought to conclude as well. There is a way to stop borrowing money, to balance the budget, and that would be to tax corporations and the rich. Oh, I know right away their mouthpieces will tell you, ooh, that could have bad consequences. Yeah, but let me tell you about the bad consequences we're having now. Bad consequence. Our schools are falling apart because the government is cutting back and has now destroyed the whole Department of Education. We're slowing down on our infrastructure improvement. Our scores for our students' achievement, our scores for the mental and physical health of our people are all going down. The costs of reduced government spending impact everybody. Taxing corporations and the rich, that hurts the percentage of our people that are employers, because that's who corporations and the rich mostly are. And as the US Census tells us, if we care to look, 3% of Americans are employers. That's the rich. Taxing them will hurt them, no question. But if anybody could stand being hurt, it's them. They're the people at the top. But serving and protecting them at the expense of all the government services we depend on, that's hurting 100% of us. And that's much worse, and will have much worse, longer consequences. Running our society the way we have is a system that puts first and foremost not America, but the top 3% of America first. And it's all coming at the expense of you and me, the 97% who are not employers. The national debt matters big time. And that is true whether you understand modern monetary theory, which explains that the government could spend without borrowing, which is true enough. That's an interesting idea. It's worth discussion, but it isn't the way we work. And that's why the national debt matters and matters more than ever. If interventions like this strike you as worthwhile, as operating at a level a lot more developed, I'm being kind here, than what you get in the mass media, then please share this video with others who might be interested or concerned. That's why we make them. And of course, as well, if you can help defray the costs we incur, that would be enormously appreciated. Thank you.